a man who had the privilege of having the Ark of the Lord, sheltered by his family in Old Testament times, but met a tragic end when he rashly touched the Ark. This is the story of Uzzah. He was the son of Abinadab, the man who housed the Ark of the Covenant in his home after the calamities that struck the Philistines. However, the striking part of Uzzah's story is the fact that God struck him down. I understand that saying God struck or killed someone may sound odd to those who forget that God is the giver of life. He gives and takes life as he sees fit, without having to justify his actions to anyone. This doesn't make God unjust or evil. On the contrary, stories like Uzzah's prove that God is utterly just and holy, just as he is entirely merciful, kind, and loving. One divine attribute doesn't negate the other. Yet, the severity of God's judgment against Uzzah raises many questions. Some feel God's punishment of Uzzah was disproportionate. These individuals don't comprehend why merely touching the ark, in an attempt to steady it, was such a grave offense. Furthermore, some wonder why Uzzah died from touching the ark when the Philistines had done the same previously, and there's no mention in the Bible of any of them being immediately struck down. If you have questions about this story, watch this video to the end to learn about Uzzah in the Bible and understand why he was punished by God. As previously mentioned, Uzzah was the son of a man named Abinadab. According to the biblical text, Uzzah also had two brothers, Eleazar and Ahio. The latter was present during the incident that cost Uzzah his life. Some scholars argue that perhaps Ahio and Uzzah weren't specifically Abinadab's sons, but his descendants, possibly his grandsons. But to understand Uzzah's story, we need to take a step back into biblical history, to the time of the judges of Israel. The Bible records that before the leadership period of the prophet Samuel, the nation was judged by the high priest Eli. However, Eli did not excel as a father. He had two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, who acted wickedly among God's people. Hophni and Phinehas committed abominable acts before the Lord, leveraging their priestly positions for their own gain. Yet, even knowing about his sons' actions, Eli did not make an effort to correct them. The man who was in charge of leading Israel failed to lead his own household. Due to his negligence, divine judgment fell upon his family and the nation. One day during a battle against the Philistines, the sacrilegious priests took the Ark of the Covenant into the battlefield, confident that the Ark's presence would ensure victory for Israel. However, the situation took a tragic turn. The Ark of the Covenant was captured by the Philistines, and both Hophni and Phinehas were killed. By that time, the high priest Eli was 98 years old and nearly blind. Upon hearing the terrible news of the battle and the loss of the Ark, he fell from his chair and died. The Philistines then took the Ark of the Covenant to their cities, but they were punished by the Lord, as described in chapter 5 of the first book of Samuel. First, the Philistines brought God's Ark to Ashdod, one of their 5 major cities. In Ashdod, they placed the Ark in the temple of Dagon, a deity they worshipped. However, the statue of Dagon was shattered before the Ark of God, and the inhabitants of Ashdod were plagued with severe afflictions. Later, the Philistines moved the Ark to other cities like Gath and Ekron, but the plagues persisted. Terrified and unable to bear the calamities befalling them, the Philistines realized that the Ark of the Covenant had to be returned to the Israelites. The Ark of the Covenant remained with the Philistines for 7 months before being sent to the border town of Beth Shemesh. In Beth Shemesh, the Ark was also treated improperly, leading to many men of that city being struck down by the Lord. It was in this setting that the Ark of the Covenant eventually ended up in Kiriath Jearim. The men of that place then took the Ark to Abinadab's house and designated Eleazar, Abinadab's son, to oversee it. Years later, with the Ark still at Abinadab's house, David, then ruling over Israel, decided to move the Ark to Jerusalem, solidifying the city as Israel's religious center. However, the Ark's transportation mission was a disaster. The Bible says they placed the Ark on a new cart pulled by oxen, with Ahio and Uzzah guiding it. Initially, the ark's transportation was accompanied by a festive caravan honoring the Lord until a fateful event occurred. As the caravan approached the threshing floor of Nacon, the oxen seemed to stumble or shift, causing the ark to tilt. Uzzah instinctively reached out to steady the ark, and God's wrath was ignited. Consequently, God struck Uzzah down, and he died beside the Ark of the Covenant. Thus that place was named Perez Uzzah, reflecting God's outburst against Uzzah. This event deeply disturbed King David. He feared the Lord and halted the ark's journey to Jerusalem. The ark was then taken to the house of a man named Obed-Edom, where it stayed for 3 months. Despite all this, many remain perplexed as to why Uzzah was struck down upon touching the ark. The biblical text of 2 Samuel 6:7 states that Uzzah died due to his irreverence in handling the ark. Having the ark in his house for so long, Uzzah was careless, violating the ark's sanctity, symbolizing God's presence among his people. They transported the ark entirely against God's instructions. God ordained the Kohathites, a Levitical family from which the priestly line also came, to carry the ark on their shoulders as noted in Numbers 4. Yet they were moving the ark on an ox cart, similar to how the Philistines had. In essence, God's chosen people were treating the ark, the pinnacle representation of God's presence during the Old Testament, in the same manner as pagan nations. Many wonder why Uzzah was killed for touching the ark when the Philistines, who had previously captured it, weren't immediately punished in the same way. In truth, God allowed the Philistines to take the ark as a judgment against Israel. Moreover, God aimed to showcase his power among foreign nations. While the ark was with the Philistines, they faced vast calamities, and their primary deity, Dagon, was humiliated before the ark of the Lord. Uzzah's situation was different. His family had been the ark's caretakers for years, presumably being Levites. It seems logical to assume that Uzzah knew God's ordinances regarding the ark's transportation. So, when the ark was finally being moved to Jerusalem, set to become God's worship center in Israel, those responsible ignored God's commands, trying to transport the ark their way. Thus, Uzzah's punishment served a pedagogical purpose, showing that God's affairs couldn't be handled carelessly. The story of Uzzah provides profound insight into the immutable holiness of God and the respect demanded by his divine presence. Uzzah's death, a consequence of touching the Ark of the Covenant, emphasizes that God's instructions and commandments are paramount. While it might seem severe to some, it underscores that disobedience, even when rooted in good intentions, cannot be dismissed. Moreover, contrasting the Israelites' handling of the Ark with the Philistines provides a lesson on the significance of understanding and obeying God's ways. The Philistines, unfamiliar with God's laws, faced calamities, but they were given time to recognize their errors and rectify them. In contrast, Uzzah, presumably knowledgeable of the divine ordinances, faced immediate judgment. In essence, Uzzah's story, laden with sorrow and divine judgment, serves as a timeless lesson about reverence, obedience, and the consequences of overlooking God's clear commands. In a world where one might be tempted to take spiritual matters lightly, Uzzah's account remains a compelling reminder of the gravity of divine affairs and the reverence required when approaching them.